My name is Aaliyah Jenkins. I am 32 years old, and I am a forensic accountant working in Atlanta, Georgia. For 5 years, I was married to a man who possessed the kind of charm that could sell ice to an Eskimo. Julian was a venture capitalist, the golden boy of the Atlanta business scene, and the man I promised to love until death do us part. I just never imagined that death would become the third party in our marriage so soon. I never imagined that while I was grieving the sudden loss of my father, the only parent I had left, my husband, was busy planning his financial freedom on the grave of my family legacy. If you are listening to this, and you have ever felt a chill run down your spine when you looked at the person sleeping next to you, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to my channel because what I'm about to tell you is going to validate every single instinct you have ever ignored. This is the story of how I died inside so that I could be reborn as the woman who destroyed them all. My husband left my father's funeral to travel with his mistress. He thought I was blinded by tears. He thought I was too broken to notice the way he checked his watch every 30 seconds while the priest was delivering the final prayer. But at 2 a.m. that same night, as I sat alone in the dark of a house that felt too big and too quiet, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. I picked it up expecting a condolence message from a relative. I nearly dropped the device when I saw the name flashing on the screen. Dad. It was a text message from my dead father. The message read, "My daughter, it is me, Dad. Come to the cemetery immediately and very quietly. Do not tell Julian. Let me take you back to 6 hours before that terrifying text message." The rain in Atlanta was relentless that afternoon. It was the kind of heavy gray downpour that soaks through your clothes and chills you to the bone. I stood under the black umbrella watching the mahogany casket being lowered into the wet earth. My father, Raymond Jenkins, was a giant of a man. He built Jenkins Logistics from a single delivery truck into a multi-million-dollar empire. He was strong as an ox. And then, in the blink of an eye, a massive heart attack took him away from me, or at least that is what the autopsy report said. I gripped Julian's hand for support, needing to feel his warmth, but his hand was limp, cold. He wasn't looking at the casket. He was looking at his phone, hiding the screen under the cuff of his expensive jacket. I saw the corner of his mouth twitch up. He was smiling. At a funeral. When the service ended, Julian turned to me. He didn't hug me. He didn't wipe the tears from my cheeks. He just adjusted his tie and checked his reflection in the car window. "Babe, I have to go," he said, his voice smooth and devoid of any real emotion. "The board of directors is panicking. With your dad gone, the stock is plummeting. I have to go handle an emergency meeting downtown to save the company." I barely nodded. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him because he was all I had left. He kissed my forehead, but it felt like a brand of betrayal. He got into his silver Porsche and drove off. But he didn't turn left toward the financial district. He turned right, towards the exit gate. Through the rain-streaked window of my limousine, I watched him slow down near the cemetery entrance. A woman stepped out from under the trees. She was wearing a trench coat that was too tight and heels that were too high for a funeral. I saw her clearly. It was Becky, the 24-year-old Instagram model my husband claimed was just a social media consultant for his firm. She hopped into the passenger seat, and for a split second, I saw Julian lean over and kiss her. Not a peck on the cheek, a deep, passionate kiss. Then they sped away, leaving me alone with my father's grave and a heart that was shattering into a million pieces. I went home to our sprawling estate in Buckhead. I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat on the living room floor, still in my black funeral dress, staring at the wall. The betrayal felt physically painful, like a knife twisting in my gut. I had spent 5 years supporting Julian, investing my own salary into his failing ventures, believing in his vision when no one else would, and this was his thank you. Leaving me on the worst day of my life to party with a woman 10 years younger than me. Then came the text at 2 a.m. My first thought was that it was a sick prank. Maybe someone had hacked my father's phone. But my father was paranoid about security. His phone was encrypted. My hands were trembling so hard I could barely grab my car keys. I didn't call the police. I didn't call Julian. An instinct, deep and primal, told me to follow the instructions. I grabbed the pepper spray I kept in my purse and a heavy flashlight from the garage. I got into my car and drove through the empty streets of Atlanta. The cemetery at 3 a.m. is a place that exists outside of reality. The fog had rolled in thick and white, swirling around the headstones like ghosts. I parked my car a block away and walked to the family mausoleum. The iron gates of the cemetery were locked, but the side service entrance was slightly ajar, just as the text had implied it would be. Every twig that snapped under my feet sounded like a gunshot. I gripped the pepper spray, my thumb hovering over the trigger. I was a forensic accountant, a woman of logic and numbers, but tonight I was walking into a horror movie. I reached the Jenkins family mausoleum. It was a large stone structure with stained glass windows. The heavy bronze door was cracked open an inch. I pushed it. It creaked, a low groan that echoed in the silence. "Dad," I whispered, my voice barely audible. I stepped inside, raising my flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness and landed on a figure sitting on a stone bench next to my father's resting place. I almost screamed, raising the pepper spray. It wasn't a ghost, and it wasn't my father. It was Mr. Henderson, my father's personal attorney and oldest friend. He was sitting there with a laptop open on his knees, the blue light illuminating his wrinkled, serious face. "Aaliyah, put the spray away," he said softly. "Come here. Sit down." "Mr. Henderson, what is going on?" I demanded, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Where is my father? Who sent that text?" "He is safe," Henderson said. He didn't look at me. He typed something into the laptop and turned the screen toward me. "Watch this." On the screen, a video file began to play. It was dated 3 days ago. My father was sitting in his study, looking straight into the camera. He looked tired, but alive. He looked furious. "Aaliyah, my baby girl," my father's voice filled the small mausoleum, echoing off the stone walls. "If you are watching this, it means the plan worked. It means everyone thinks I am dead, especially your husband." I gasped, covering my mouth with my hand. "Plan? What plan?" "I am not dead." "Aaliyah," the video continued, "I am currently in a private medical facility under the protection of the FBI in a medically induced coma. We had to stage the heart attack. It was the only way to stop him." "Stop who?" I whispered, though I already knew the answer. Julian, my father, said on the screen, his eyes burning with intensity. "I hired a private investigator 6 months ago because funds were missing from the logistics company. I thought it was an external hacker. It wasn't. It was Julian. He has been siphoning money through shell companies in the Cayman Islands. He is washing money for the cartel's Aaliyah. But that isn't the worst part." My father took a deep breath on the video. 2 weeks ago, I found pills in his briefcase. They looked like my heart medication, but the serial numbers were wrong. I had them tested. He swapped my digoxin for a high-dose stimulant that induces cardiac arrest. He wasn't just stealing from me, daughter. He was trying to murder me. The world tilted on its axis. I felt bile rise in my throat. My husband, the man who brought me coffee in bed, the man who whispered sweet nothings in my ear, he was a murderer, a cold-blooded killer. Henderson paused the video. He looked at me with pity in his eyes. "We couldn't go to the police immediately. Julian has covered his tracks well. If we arrested him now, he would get out on bail and destroy the evidence. We need access to his personal encrypted ledger. And the only way to get that is if he thinks he has won. He thinks he has won," I said, my voice shaking with rage. I saw him with her. He was celebrating." Henderson nodded grimly. "That is why you are here, Aaliyah. Your father needs you to do the hardest thing you have ever done. On Friday, in 5 days, the reading of the will takes place. Julian expects to be named the executor of the estate because he thinks you are too emotional to handle the business. He needs your signature to transfer the assets. So I refuse, I asked. I tell him to go to hell." "No," Henderson said firmly. "You do exactly what he expects. You play the role of the grieving, broken widow. You cry, you stay in bed, you let him think you are weak and useless. Because when he thinks you are weak, he gets sloppy. We need you to get close to his phone and clone his data. We need you to record him admitting to the fraud." "I can't," I sobbed. "I can't look at him. I can't let him touch me knowing he tried to kill my dad." Henderson sighed and clicked another file on the laptop. I didn't want to show you this, but you need to hear it. This was recorded yesterday in your kitchen while you were at the funeral home making arrangements. I leaned in. The audio quality was crisp. I heard the clinking of wine glasses. Then I heard Julian's voice. "The old man is finally out of the way," Julian said. He sounded happy. Drunk. Then I heard another voice, a female voice, high-pitched and whining. It wasn't Becky, it was Tiffany, Julian's younger sister, my sister-in-law, the woman I had treated like my own blood. "So when do we get the money?" Big Brother Tiffany asked. "I have debts to pay, and Aaliyah is going to be a problem. She is tight with money. She acts like she is so superior with her fancy degree." Julian laughed. A cruel, dark sound. "Don't worry about Aaliyah. She is a pathetic daddy's girl. She is so distraught she can barely tie her own shoes. I will have her sign the power of attorney by Friday. Once the assets are transferred, I will dump her in a mental institution for grief counseling and file for divorce. By the time she gets out, we will be living in Italy, and she will be homeless. She is just a stepping stone, Tiff. A stepping stone that has outlived its usefulness." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply leaned over to the side of the stone bench and vomited. I emptied my stomach until there was nothing left but acid. The image of Julian's face, the memory of our wedding vows, the 5 years of my life I gave him, it all dissolved in that moment. Mr. Henderson handed me a handkerchief. I wiped my mouth and stood up. The cool night air hit my face, drying the sweat on my forehead. I looked at the laptop screen, at the paused image of my father. I looked at the dark corners of the mausoleum. When I walked into that cemetery, I was a widow. I was a victim. I was a broken woman. But as I stood there listening to the man I loved plot to put me in an asylum and leave me destitute, something inside me snapped. It was a clean, sharp break. The sadness evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating fury. I am a forensic accountant. My entire career is built on finding the truth that people try to hide in the numbers. I find the rot. I expose the lies. I looked at Henderson. The fear was gone from my voice. "Tell my father I am in," I said. Henderson handed me a small black USB drive. "This contains the cloning software. You have 5 days, Aaliyah. Can you do it? Can you sleep next to a monster and pretend you don't know he is a devil?" I gripped the USB drive so hard it cut into my palm. I thought about the blonde in the car. I thought about Tiffany laughing in my kitchen. I thought about the pills in my father's bag. I looked Henderson dead in the eye. "Julian thinks I am a weak, grieving wife. He thinks I am stupid. He is about to find out that he didn't just marry a wife. He married his worst nightmare. I won't just get the evidence, Mr. Henderson. I am going to burn his entire world to the ground, and I am going to smile while I watch it turn to ash." I turned around and walked out of the mausoleum. The rain had stopped. The silence of the graveyard didn't scare me anymore. I was the scariest thing walking in the dark tonight. I got back into my car and drove home to my husband. The game had officially begun. The iron gates of our Buckhead estate swung open slowly at 5 in the morning. The sun was just beginning to bleed a pale gray light over the horizon, but the air was still heavy with the damp chill of the night. I drove my car up the winding driveway and my hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles had turned white. I was exhausted. My body felt like it was made of lead, but my mind was racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour. I had just left my dead father in a mausoleum and signed a pact to destroy my husband. I needed to sleep. I needed to wash the smell of the cemetery off my skin, but as I rounded the final curve of the driveway, I slammed on my brakes. There was a red Mercedes convertible parked haphazardly right in front of the main entrance. It was blocking the stairs. I knew that car. I hated that car. It belonged to Tiffany, Julian's younger sister. A wave of nausea hit me. I had been gone for less than 3 hours, and the vultures were already circling. I took a deep breath, checked my reflection in the rearview mirror to make sure my eyes still looked red and puffy from crying, and stepped out of the car. I had to put the mask back on. The forensic accountant was gone. The grieving, helpless widow was back. I pushed open the heavy front double doors, and the sound of high heels clicking on the marble floor echoed through the foyer. It sounded like gunfire in the quiet house. Before I could even set my keys down, Tiffany came strutting out of the formal living room. She was wearing a silk robe, my silk robe, the one Julian had bought me for our anniversary last year. She was holding a glass of mimosa in one hand and a half-eaten croissant in the other. "Oh my God! Aaliyah, there you are!" she shrieked. Her voice was high and scratchy like nails on a chalkboard. "Where have you been?" Julian was worried sick. "We thought maybe you did something crazy." I looked at her. I looked at my robe wrapped around her body. I looked at the crumbs dropping from her mouth onto my pristine floors. I forced my shoulders to slump. I let my voice crack. "I just went for a drive," I whispered, looking down at the floor. I couldn't sleep. The house felt too empty. Tiffany took a sip of the mimosa and smirked. "Well, it isn't empty anymore. I told Julian that you simply cannot be alone in this big old house in your fragile state. It is dangerous for you. So I decided to sacrifice my comfort and move in for a while. You know, to help out, to manage the household while you recover." I already had the movers bring my things. I took the guest suite on the second floor, the one with the balcony. She didn't ask. She informed me. She had moved into my home less than 24 hours after my father's funeral. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rip that robe off her and throw her out onto the lawn. But I remembered Henderson's words. "Let them think you are weak." "Thank you, Tiffany," I said softly. "That is very kind of you." She waved her hand dismissively. "Don't mention it. Oh, and I need you to give Mary a talking to. She is moving so slow today. I told her to deep clean the guest suite bathroom before I unpacked, and she is still in there scrubbing. It is ridiculous. Good help is so hard to find these days. My blood ran cold. Mary. Ms. Mary was 65 years old. She had been with my family since I was a baby. She practically raised me after my mom died. She had severe arthritis in her knees. I walked past Tiffany and headed straight for the stairs. I found Mary in the guest bathroom on her hands and knees scrubbing the grout with a toothbrush. Her face was gray with exhaustion, and beads of sweat were dripping down her forehead. "Mary, please get up," I said, rushing over to help her. "You shouldn't be doing this." Mary looked up at me and her eyes were filled with tears. "Oh, Miss Aaliyah, I am sorry." Miss Tiffany said the floor was filthy. She said if I didn't get it spotless, she would tell Mr. Julian to fire me. "I need this job, baby. I have my grandbaby's tuition to pay." I helped Mary to her feet. My heart was breaking. This was the reality of my marriage that I had ignored for too long. Julian and his family didn't just disrespect me. They looked down on people who looked like me. They treated Mary like a slave because they knew she needed the money. "Go downstairs, Mary," I said firmly but gently. "Go to your room and rest. Do not clean another thing today. If Tiffany asks, tell her I sent you on an errand." "But Miss Aaliyah," Mary stammered. "Go," I insisted. "I promise you nobody is firing you today." As Mary limped away, I turned around to find Tiffany leaning against the doorframe watching us with a look of amusement. "You are too soft on them, Aaliyah," she said, taking another bite of her croissant. "That is why this house is always a mess. But don't worry, I will whip this place into shape now that I am here." I lowered my head to hide the murderous rage in my eyes. I walked past her into the bedroom, aiming for the safe. I needed to check if she had touched anything. Tiffany followed me. Of course she did. She sat on the edge of my bed while I walked into the walk-in closet. "So listen," she called out. I was thinking. "Since your dad is gone and everything, God rest his soul, he left behind a lot of stuff that is just going to gather dust. Julian told me about that climate-controlled storage unit downtown, the one where your dad kept his vintage collection." I froze. My father's collection. He collected rare vintage luxury bags and watches. It was his passion. He saw them as art. "What about it?" I asked, keeping my back to her. "Well," Tiffany continued, her voice dripping with fake innocence, "leather rots if you don't use it right. And those Hermes, Birkins, and Kellys are just sitting there. You are not going to use them. You are always so practical with your little laptop bags. It is a shame to let them go to waste. I was thinking maybe you could give me the key. I could go sort through them, maybe sell some of the damaged ones for you. Keep a few as a memento. You know, to remember him by. To remember him by." She had met my father twice, and both times she had ignored him to text on her phone. She didn't want a memento. She wanted a payday. She wanted to drape herself in my father's legacy and parade it around town. I turned around slowly. I saw the greed in her eyes. It was hungry and ugly. If I said no, she would complain to Julian. Julian would come in here and pressure me. It would turn into a fight I couldn't afford to have right now. I needed to buy time. I needed to buy her silence. I walked over to the small wall safe hidden behind a painting. I spun the dial. Tiffany watched me like a hawk trying to memorize the combination. I blocked her view with my body. I opened the safe and took out a heavy brass key. "You are right," I said, my voice trembling. "I can't bear to look at his things right now. It hurts too much. If you want to handle it, please do." I held out the key. Tiffany's eyes lit up like it was Christmas morning. She snatched the key from my hand so fast, she almost scratched me. "Oh, Aaliyah, you are the best," she squealed. She didn't hug me. She just clutched the key to her chest. "I will take good care of them. Don't you worry." She turned to leave, eager to probably go Google how much a Himalayan Birkin was worth. "Tiffany." "Wait," I said. She stopped, looking annoyed. "What? Can you help me with something? My phone is acting up. I can't seem to access the cloud to download the funeral photos. You are so good with tech. Can you check if the Wi-Fi is down?" I held out my phone, but then I deliberately dropped it on the thick carpet. "Oops, I am so clumsy today." Tiffany rolled her eyes. She pulled her phone out of her robe pocket. "Let me check mine." She unlocked her phone. It was an iPhone, the latest model. "Here," I said, reaching for a tissue on the nightstand. "While you check that, can you just confirm if the security code for the gate is still the same? I think the delivery guy is having trouble." Tiffany sighed loudly. She placed her unlocked phone on the bedspread next to me and walked over to the window to look down at the gate. "Ugh, I don't see anyone there, Aaliyah. You are imagining things." That was all I needed. 10 seconds. The moment she turned her back, my hand moved with the precision of a surgeon. I pulled the small black USB device Henderson had given me out of my pocket. It had a lightning connector. I plugged it into the bottom of her phone. The screen flashed once. A small green bar appeared, loading rapidly. 20%. "I see a truck down the street," Tiffany said, squinting through the glass. "Is that the florist?" "Maybe," I said. "Watching the bar. 50%. Tiffany turned her head slightly. "Who sends flowers at 5 a.m.? I coughed loudly to cover the sound of the device clicking. "It is probably the bakery delivery for the wake later. 70%. "Come on! Come on!" Tiffany started to turn back around. "Well, I don't see them buzzing the gate." "Done. Green light." I yanked the drive out and shoved it under my pillow just as she fully turned around. Her phone screen returned to normal instantly. "It seems fine now," I said, breathing out. "My phone just reconnected. Sorry to bother you." Tiffany walked back, grabbed her phone from the bed without even looking at it. "Whatever. I am going to get dressed. I want to get to that storage unit as soon as it opens. Get some sleep, Aaliyah. You look terrible." She walked out of the room, swinging her hips, clutching the key to my father's treasure, and the phone that would be her undoing. I waited until I heard her door close down the hall. Then I collapsed onto the bed. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I pulled the USB drive from under the pillow and clenched it in my fist. "Go ahead, Tiffany," I whispered to the empty room. "Go steal my father's bags. Go treat my house like a hotel. Because every text you send, every photo you take, every call you make to your brother, plotting against me, I will see it. I will hear it. You wanted to be part of this family so bad. Well, welcome to the family. You just gave me the weapon I need to bury you right next to the empty coffin you cried over yesterday." I closed my eyes, but I didn't sleep. I lay there in the dark, listening to the house settle, waiting for my husband to come home so I could begin Act 2 of this nightmare. The invasion had begun, but the war was far from over. The clock on the bedside table read 7:30 in the evening when I finally heard the rumble of Julian's Porsche in the driveway. I had been lying in that bed for hours, staring at the ceiling and listening to the house settle around me. My body was aching from the tension of maintaining this charade, but my mind was sharper than it had ever been. I had to remind myself to breathe. I had to remind myself to relax my jaw. I had to transform back into the broken, shattered widow he expected to find. I heard his heavy footsteps coming up the stairs. Each step sounded like a threat. When the door handle turned, I pulled the duvet up to my chin and squeezed my eyes shut, letting out a soft, pathetic whimper. I needed him to believe I was barely holding on. Julian walked into the room. The first thing that hit me wasn't his voice or his touch. It was the smell. It washed over me in a suffocating wave as he sat on the edge of the bed. It was a cloying mixture of vanilla and cheap musk. It was distinctive. It was aggressive. It was the exact same perfume I had smelled drifting from the woman in the trench coat at the cemetery. It was Becky's scent. He was covered in it. It was in his hair, on his clothes, probably even on his skin. He leaned down and kissed my forehead. I had to use every ounce of willpower not to recoil. I had to force myself not to gag. "Hey, baby," he whispered, his voice dripping with a fake concern that made my skin crawl. I am so sorry I was gone so long. The board meeting was a disaster. Everyone is panicking about the stock prices. I had to calm them down. I had to be the strong one for the family legacy. He was lying. I knew he was lying. He hadn't been at a board meeting. He had been with her, and he didn't even respect me enough to take a shower before coming home to his grieving wife. He thought I was so stupid, so blinded by tears, that I wouldn't notice he smelled like another woman's bed. I opened my eyes, slowly blinking as if the dim light hurt them. I looked at him. I looked at the man I had shared a bed with for 5 years. He looked disheveled. His tie was loose. His top button was undone. To the outside world, it looked like the stress of a grieving son-in-law. To me, it looked like a man who had just finished celebrating his victory. "You smell different," I croaked out, making my voice sound weak and raspy. He didn't even flinch. He just smiled a sad, practiced smile and stroked my cheek. "It is incense, baby. The funeral home scent. It clings to everything, doesn't it? I can't seem to wash the smell of death off me today. The audacity of this man. He was blaming the smell of his mistress on my father's funeral. It took everything I had not to scream. Instead, I let a single tear roll down my cheek. I miss him, Julian. I sobbed, burying my face in the pillow to hide the disgust in my eyes. I miss him so much. I know he soothed rubbing my back. I know you do. But you have to stay strong. You have to take care of yourself. You haven't eaten all day, have you? Tiffany told me you locked yourself in here. I shook my head. I can't eat. I feel sick. You need something? He insisted, standing up. I'm going to go downstairs and make you something warm. Just a little something to help you sleep. You need to rest, Aaliyah. The next few days are going to be hard. He left the room, and I sat up, wiping the fake tears from my face. My heart was pounding against my ribs, something warm to help me sleep. The words echoed in my mind. My father had died because his heart medication was swapped. Julian was a man who used chemicals to solve his problems. 10 minutes later, he returned carrying a silver tray. On it was a steaming mug of warm milk with a sprinkle of nutmeg on top. It looked comforting. It looked innocent. It was the same drink his mother used to make for us when we visited her. But as he walked closer, I noticed something. His hand was shaking slightly, just a tiny tremor. And he was watching me. He was watching me with an intensity that didn't match the casual act of bringing a drink. Here, he said, sitting on the bed and holding the mug out to me. Drink this. It is my mom's recipe. It will help calm your nerves. I took the mug. It was warm in my hands. I looked down at the white liquid. The nutmeg swirled on the surface. Did it look powdery? Was there a sediment at the bottom? I couldn't tell. Thank you, I whispered, bringing the mug to my lips. I took a tiny sip, just wetting my lips, but not swallowing. It tasted normal. But cyanide tastes like almonds. Arsenic has no taste at all, and heavy sedatives can easily be masked by nutmeg. Drink it all, he encouraged, watching my throat. You need the calcium. You look so pale. I lowered the mug. I can't drink it while it is this hot. I lied. I will drink it in a minute. Can you go get me a glass of water too? My throat is so dry from crying. He hesitated. For a split second, I saw annoyance flash in his eyes. He wanted to watch me drink it. He wanted to make sure I swallowed whatever cocktail he had mixed in that kitchen. But he couldn't break character. He had to be the loving husband. Of course, baby, he said, standing up. Anything for you. I will be right back. He turned and walked toward the bathroom to get the water from the tap. He didn't close the door, but his back was to me. I moved with the speed of a desperate animal. I leaned over the side of the bed. Sitting in the corner near the window was a large potted peace lily. It was a beautiful, lush plant that my father had given us as a housewarming gift. I poured the entire contents of the mug into the soil, burying the white liquid under the dark leaves. I sat back up and wiped the milk mustache from my upper lip just as Julian turned off the tap. When he came back into the room, the mug was empty on the nightstand. "You drank it fast," he said. He sounded relieved. He sounded happy. I nodded, closing my eyes. I didn't realize how thirsty I was. "Thank you, Julian." He set the water down and sat next to me again. He watched me for a moment, waiting for the drugs to kick in. I decided to give him what he wanted. I let my eyelids droop. I let my head loll to the side. I made my breathing slow and heavy. "That is it," he whispered, stroking my hair. "Just relax. You are so tired. You don't have to worry about anything. I'm here to take care of everything." He waited another 5 minutes until he was sure I was groggy. Then he reached into his jacket pocket. I heard the rustle of paper. "Aaliyah," he whispered softly. I mumbled, keeping my eyes half closed. "Baby, I hate to bother you right now, but I really need your help with something small." He pulled out a stack of documents. They weren't small. It was a thick stack of legal papers. "What is it?" I slurred my words, slightly mimicking the effect of a heavy sedative. "It is just some boring stuff for the vendors." He lied smoothly. "The florists need a signature to process the payment for the funeral flowers, and the caterers for the wake, and there are a few transfer forms for the utilities since your dad passed. We don't want the lights to get cut off at the warehouse, do we?" He put a pen in my hand. He positioned the papers on a magazine and held them up for me. "Just sign here," he pointed to a line at the bottom of a page. "And here." I looked at the page through my eyelashes. The text was dense and legal. I saw the words power of attorney. I saw the words asset liquidation. I saw the words Jenkins Logistics Holdings. These weren't bills for flowers. He was trying to get me to sign over the company 3 days before the will reading. He wanted to strip me of my power before I even knew I had it. If I refused, he would know I was alert. He would know I was suspicious. He might try something more drastic. But if I signed a legal document while under the influence of a sedative or under duress, it could be contested in court. But I had a better plan. "I can't see," I whimpered, rubbing my eyes. "It is all blurry, Julian. The words are swimming." "It is okay, baby. You don't need to read it," he urged, pressing the pen into my fingers. "It is standard stuff. Just sign your name. Do it for me. Do it so I can handle the stress for you." I let my hand tremble. I gripped the pen like a child learning to write. I pressed the tip to the paper. But I didn't sign Aaliyah Jenkins. I made a messy, jagged scrawl that looked vaguely like my initials but was legally unrecognizable. I scribbled outside the line. I let the pen trail off the page. "Oops," I mumbled, dropping the pen. "I am so tired, Julian. My hand won't work." He looked at the signature. It was a mess. But to him it probably looked like the signature of a drugged, grieving woman. It was enough for him. He believed his own lie so much that he thought he could pass this off. "That is perfect," he said, snatching the papers away before I could look at them closer. "That is all I needed. You did good, Aaliyah. You did so good." He put the papers back in his pocket. He kissed my forehead again. "Now sleep," he commanded. "Sleep for a long time." He stood up and turned off the bedside lamp, plunging the room into darkness. I heard him walk to the door. I heard him pause. "Goodbye, Aaliyah," he whispered. It wasn't good night. It was goodbye. He closed the door. I lay there in the dark, listening to his footsteps fade down the hall. I waited until I was sure he was gone. Then I sat up and looked at the peace lily in the corner. By tomorrow morning that plant would be dead. The leaves would turn brown and shrivel up from whatever poison was in that milk. And I would take a picture of it. I would dig up the soil sample and put it in a sterile bag. He thought he had just tricked his wife into signing away her fortune. He thought he had drugged me into submission, but all he had done was give me Exhibit A for his attempted murder trial. I lay back down, but I didn't sleep. I couldn't sleep. I lay there plotting. I lay there counting the hours until Friday. I lay there thinking about the look on his face when he realizes that the blurry-eyed widow he tucked into bed is actually the woman who is going to watch him rot in a cell for the rest of his life. Julian wanted a perfect wife. Well, he was about to get a perfect performance, and the grand finale was going to be spectacular. 3 days had passed since the funeral, and the atmosphere in my house was suffocating. I had spent 72 hours playing the role of the grieving widow, shuffling through the hallways in my pajamas, clutching a tissue, and signing whatever papers Julian shoved in front of me with a trembling hand. But tonight was different. Julian had told me to dress up. He said we had a very important guest coming for dinner, a business partner who was going to help save Jenkins Logistics from the financial ruin he claimed my father had left behind. I stood in front of the mirror in the master bathroom staring at my reflection. I had applied my makeup carefully to hide the dark circles under my eyes, but I made sure to leave my face looking slightly pale and drawn. I wore a modest black dress that hung a little loose on my frame. I wanted to look fragile. I wanted to look like a woman who was fading away. When I walked down the grand staircase, the dining room was already set. Tiffany had taken it upon herself to arrange the table. She had used my mother's fine china, the delicate porcelain with the gold rim that we only used for Thanksgiving and Christmas. Seeing those plates laid out for a business meeting made my stomach churn. But when the doorbell rang and I saw who walked in, the nausea turned into a cold, hard rage. Julian opened the door with a flourish. Standing there was not a banker in a suit or a lawyer with a briefcase. It was her, the woman from the cemetery, the woman whose cheap vanilla perfume was currently seeping into the pores of my husband's skin. Becky. She was wearing a red dress that was so tight it looked like it had been spray painted onto her body. The neckline plunged dangerously low, and the hemline barely covered her thighs. She teetered on 6-inch gold stilettos. She looked like she was going to a nightclub, not a business dinner at a grieving widow's home. Aaliyah, Julian said, stepping aside to let her in, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of lust and arrogance. I want you to meet Rebecca. She is the new external financial advisor I have brought on board to restructure the company assets. She comes highly recommended. Financial advisor. I almost laughed out loud. This woman looked like she struggled to calculate a tip at a restaurant, let alone restructure a multi-million-dollar logistics empire. But I forced a polite, tight smile onto my face. Nice to meet you, Rebecca, I said, extending my hand. She looked at my hand for a second before giving it a limp, dismissive shake. Her acrylic nails were so long they clicked against my skin. Please call me Becky, she said, popping her gum. And wow, Julian, you were right. This house is huge. It must be so lonely in here for just 2 people, especially now. She walked past me without waiting for a response, her eyes scanning the foyer with the same greedy hunger I had seen in Tiffany. We moved into the dining room. Tiffany was already seated at the table, scrolling on her phone. When she saw Becky, her face lit up. It was sickening to watch. My sister-in-law, who had barely spoken 2 kind words to me in 5 years, was suddenly beaming at this stranger. "Oh my God, I love your dress," Tiffany squealed, standing up to hug Becky. "Is that the new collection from Revolve? I have been dying to get that, but they are sold out in my size." Becky giggled, flipping her blonde hair over her shoulder. "You have a good eye." "Yeah, Julian got it for me as a signing bonus, for joining the team." I sat at the head of the table opposite Julian. Becky sat to his right and Tiffany sat to his left. I was isolated, the outsider in my own home. As the maid served the salad, the conversation turned from business to a roast of Aaliyah Jenkins. "So Aaliyah," Becky said, stabbing a cherry tomato with her fork. "Julian tells me you have just been resting a lot lately. You really should try to get out more. Depression can really make you let yourself go if you aren't careful. I mean, no offense, but you look exhausted." I gripped my napkin under the table. "I am grieving, Becky," I said softly. "My father just died." "I know," she said, waving her fork around. "But you have to move on, right? Life goes on. You can't just sit around eating comfort food. My trainer says that grief is the #1 cause of weight gain in women over 30. Metabolism slows down, You don't want to lose your figure on top of everything else. Julian needs a wife who can keep up with him. He is a very high-energy man." She winked at Julian. He didn't reprimand her. He didn't defend me. He just chuckled and took a sip of his wine. "She is right, Aaliyah," Julian said. "You have been looking a little frumpy lately. Maybe you should ask Becky for some tips. She is very disciplined." Tiffany chimed in, her mouth full of bread. "Oh, please, Julian. Aaliyah has never cared about fashion or fitness. She is just like her dad was, old-fashioned. She thinks saving money is more important than looking good. I asked her for a simple loan last month for a personal trainer, and she gave me a lecture about compound interest. Can you believe that Becky laughed a high-pitched, cruel sound? Oh, wow. Boring. You know, money is meant to be spent, right? What is the point of having it if you don't enjoy it? That is my philosophy as a financial advisor. You have to leverage your assets to maximize your lifestyle. I looked at the three of them. My husband, the adulterer, his sister, the leech, and his mistress, the moron. They were mocking me in my own dining room, eating my food, drinking my wine, and planning to spend my inheritance. They thought I was a mouse. They thought I was a simple housewife who didn't understand the world of finance. But they forgot who I was. Before I married Julian, I wasn't just a daddy's girl. I was a senior auditor at Deloitte. I spent 10 years hunting down white-collar criminals. I could read a balance sheet better than I could read a dinner menu. I decided it was time to test the new financial advisor. I put my fork down and looked at Becky with wide, innocent eyes. "That is such an interesting philosophy, Becky," I said, keeping my voice sweet and naive. "I admit I am not very good with the modern way of doing business. My father was very conservative. He always worried about boring things like liquidity ratios and tax liabilities." I saw Julian stiffen slightly. He knew I was smart, but he hoped my grief had dulled my edge. Becky nodded confidently, taking the bait. "Exactly. Old school thinking holds you back. You have to take risks." So I continued tilting my head. "Since you are restructuring the company assets, I was just wondering what your strategy is for the current fiscal year. Specifically regarding the EBITDA margins. Do you think we should focus on leveraging the equity to increase capital expenditure, or should we focus on debt consolidation to improve the credit rating before the next quarter audit?" Silence. Absolute dead silence descended on the table. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Becky froze with her wine glass halfway to her mouth. Her eyes darted from me to Julian, then back to me. She blinked rapidly. She stammered. Her confidence evaporated instantly. "Well, you know, the margins are... We are looking at all the options." "Of course," I said, nodding encouragingly. "And what about the shell companies in the Caymans? Julian mentioned you were an expert in international finance. Do you think the new IRS regulations on offshore tax havens will impact the liquidity flow? I didn't say laundering." I stopped myself just in time. But I saw the panic in Julian's eyes. He choked on his wine. Becky looked like a deer in headlights. She had no idea what EBITDA meant. She probably thought it was a type of pasta. Julian handles the technical stuff," she said, her voice losing its trill and becoming small and defensive. "I am more of a big picture person. I handle the relationships." "Relationships," I repeated slowly, letting the word hang in the air. "Ah, I see. So you don't actually do the math." "Well, She flushed a deep, ugly red. Julian slammed his wine glass down on the table. The sound made Tiffany jump. "Okay, that is enough shop talk," he said, his voice loud and strained. "Aaliyah, stop grilling her. Stop. Becky is here to help with the creative direction of the investments. She is not an accountant. We have people for that." I looked at Julian. Then I looked at Becky, who was now pouting and checking her reflection in her spoon. "Oh, I apologize," I said with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "I must have misunderstood. When you said financial advisor, I assumed she dealt with numbers, but now I understand." I took a sip of my water and looked Becky dead in the eye. "It seems you specialize more in oral communications. Is that right?" The air left the room. Tiffany gasped. Becky's mouth fell open. Julian turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. "Did she just..." Tiffany started but trailed off. Not sure if I was being innocent or insulting. I simply meant, I continued breezily picking up my fork again, that you seem very good at talking, at persuading people. That is a very valuable skill, Becky. My husband certainly seems to appreciate it. I saw Julian's hand clench into a fist on the table. He wanted to scream at me. He wanted to flip the table. But he couldn't. He needed me to sign the final transfer papers tomorrow morning. If he made a scene now, if he revealed his true nature, I might clam up. I might call a lawyer. He had to swallow the insult. He had to sit there and let his wife humiliate his mistress because he was too greedy to risk the payout. He cleared his throat. His smile was tight and terrifying. Yes, well, Becky is very talented. Now let's eat. This roast looks delicious. We ate in silence for the rest of the meal. The only sounds were the scraping of silverware and the heavy breathing of three people who hated each other. I ate every bite of my dinner. For the first time in 3 days, I had an appetite. Watching Becky struggle to cut her meat with her shaking hands was the most delicious thing I had tasted all week. As soon as dinner was over, I stood up. "Thank you for a lovely evening," I said, wiping my mouth. "I am feeling quite tired now. The grief comes in waves. I think I will go upstairs and rest." I walked to the door but stopped and turned back to Becky. "It was so nice to meet you, Becky. Good luck with the restructuring. I am sure you and Julian will make a great team. Just be careful with those heels on the marble floors. It would be a shame if you slipped and fell. Accidents happen so easily in this house." I didn't wait for a response. I walked out of the dining room and up the stairs. As I reached the landing, I heard Julian's voice hissing in a whisper downstairs. "Calm down, Becky. She is just a crazy, jealous B-word. She doesn't know anything. Just wait until tomorrow. Once she signs those papers, I will kick her out so fast her head will spin." I smiled into the darkness of the hallway. "Tomorrow, Julian?" "Yes, tomorrow. But you are the one whose head is going to spin, and unlike you, I have done the math. And the numbers, they don't look good for you. They don't look good at all." The house was silent, but it was the kind of silence that felt heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. It was midnight. The dinner party from hell was over. Tiffany had retreated to her guest suite, and Julian had told me he needed to work late in the study with Becky to finalize the portfolio strategy. He told me to go to bed. He told me not to wait up. I went to the master bedroom and locked the door, but I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark with my laptop open on my knees. Earlier that day, while Julian was in the shower, I had managed to slip a tiny wireless camera behind the books on the shelf in his study. Now I was watching the feed. The screen flickered in black and white. I saw them. Julian and Becky were not working on portfolios. They were on the leather couch. I watched my husband pouring champagne for the woman who had insulted me at my own dinner table. I watched them toast. "To the new life," Julian said, raising his glass. "To Italy." To us, Becky giggled. Then they started kissing. It was repulsive. I watched them stumble out of the frame. I switched the camera feed to the hallway. They were heading toward the East Wing, toward the soundproof media room. They thought they were being discreet. They thought the grieving widow was fast asleep in the West Wing. This was my chance. I slipped out of bed. I didn't bother with slippers. I needed to move silently. The house was dark and shadows stretched across the hallway like long fingers. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that echoed in my ears. I crept down the stairs, skipping the third step because I knew it creaked. I reached the study door. It was closed. I turned the handle slowly, holding my breath. It clicked open. The room smelled like them. Cheap vanilla perfume and stale champagne. I wanted to gag, but I forced myself to walk to the massive mahogany desk. This was where Julian played the big businessman. This was where he thought he was safe. I sat in his chair. It was still warm. I woke up his computer. Password. I stared at the prompt. Julian was arrogant, but he wasn't complex. I tried his birthday. Incorrect. I tried his mother's name. Incorrect. I paused. I thought about the conversation I had heard earlier. I typed in Italy 2024. Access granted. The desktop flickered to life. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I wasn't Aaliyah the wife anymore. I was Aaliyah the forensic accountant. I knew exactly where men like Julian hid their dirt. They never put it in the obvious folders. They buried it deep in system files or disguised it as boring administrative data. I plugged in the cloning drive Henderson had given me, but while it worked, I started digging manually. I needed to see it with my own eyes. I found a folder named Jenkins Logistics Audit. I opened it. It wasn't an audit. It was a liquidation plan. I scrolled through those documents and my blood turned to ice. There were emails to a private equity firm in New York. Julian was negotiating the sale of my father's company. He was selling it for parts, the trucks, the warehouses, the brand name. He was planning to dissolve the entire empire my father had built over 40 years, and the date of the sale was set for next Monday, 3 days after he expected to get my signature. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. I opened a spreadsheet titled Personal Expenses. The numbers were staggering: $100,000 to the Bellagio in Las Vegas, $50,000 to an online betting site, $200,000 to a loan shark named Vinny. My husband wasn't just a cheater, he was a degenerate gambler. He had gambled away our savings, he had gambled away his own trust fund, and now he was gambling with my inheritance. Then I found the file that made me stop breathing. It was a PDF document, a mortgage deed. I opened it. It was a loan agreement for $3 million. The collateral listed was 1200 Highland Drive. My house. This house. This house was in my name. My father had bought it for me outright before I got married. It was my property. Julian had no legal right to leverage it. I scrolled to the bottom of the page. There was a signature. Aaliyah Jenkins. It was a forgery, a bad one. But it had been notarized. I looked at the notary stamp. It belonged to a friend of Julian's from college. He had forged my signature to take out a $3 million loan against my home. And where did that money go? I tracked the wire transfer. It didn't go to the company. It went to a shell account in the Cayman Islands. And from there, it was transferred to a real estate agency in Tuscany, Italy. He bought a villa. He stole my house to buy a castle for himself and his mistress. I sat back in the chair feeling dizzy. The magnitude of the betrayal was physical. It felt like I had been punched in the stomach. He wasn't just leaving me. He was planning to leave me homeless, bankrupt, and broken while he lived like a king in Europe on my father's money. I looked at the screen. The cloning bar was at 90%. "Come on," I whispered. "Come on." Suddenly I heard a sound. It wasn't the house settling. It was the click of a heel on the hardwood floor, right outside the door. I froze. I couldn't run. I couldn't hide. The cloning drive was still blinking red. If I pulled it out now, the data would be corrupted. The door handle turned. I did the only thing I could do. I grabbed a tissue from the box on the desk and buried my face in my hands, letting out a loud, ragged sob just as the door swung open. Light from the hallway flooded the room. "What the hell are you doing?" It wasn't Julian. It was Tiffany. I looked up through my fingers. Tiffany was standing there in her silk pajamas, looking suspicious and annoyed. She looked at me. She looked at the computer screen. I stood up, wiping my eyes. My mind was racing. If she looked at the screen, she would see the bank transfers. She would see the forgery. She would run and tell Julian, and he would destroy everything before the police could arrive. I needed a lie. A big one. A lie that spoke to the only language Tiffany understood. Greed. I couldn't sleep. "Tiffany," I stammered, my voice trembling. I was so worried about Julian, worried about him." Tiffany scoffed, walking into the room. Her eyes were darting around, looking for something to use against me. "He is working. You should be in bed. Why are you on his computer?" I took a deep breath. I walked around the desk, putting myself between her and the screen. I was looking for the life insurance policy. I lied. Tiffany stopped. Her ears practically perked up. "Life insurance?" "Yes," I sniffled. With Dad passing so suddenly, it made me realize how fragile life is. Julian works so hard. The stress is killing him, Tiffany. You see how tired he is. If something happened to him, if he had a heart attack like Dad. I let the sentence hang in the air. Tiffany took a step closer. Her face softened, not with sympathy, but with calculation. And she asked, "And I realized I never updated the beneficiary," I said, looking down at my hands. "It is still set to my old charity. I wanted to change it. I wanted to make sure Julian is the sole beneficiary. And you? Me? Tiffany asked, her voice rising an octave. Yes, I nodded. You are his sister. Family is everything, right? There is a policy for $5 million. I wanted to print the forms tonight so I can sign them tomorrow along with the other papers. I just want to make sure you guys are taken care of if anything happens to me or him. I looked at her with wide, tear-filled eyes. I watched the gears turn in her head. She didn't see a woman investigating a crime. She saw a walking ATM machine handing out cash. $5 million. She looked at the computer, then back at me. A smile spread across her face. A shark sensing blood. Oh, Aaliyah, she said, her voice suddenly dripping with honey. That is actually really smart of you. You are right. Julian is under so much pressure. God forbid something happens, but you have to be practical. Exactly, I said. I just can't find the file. I am so useless with this stuff. Tiffany walked over to me. She put a hand on my shoulder. It took everything I had not to shrug it off. Don't worry, she said, looking at the computer screen over my shoulder. I am sure it is in the cloud. Look, do you want me to help you find it? No, I said a little too quickly. No, I don't want to bother you. You need your beauty sleep. I will call the broker in the morning. I just wanted to do it as a surprise. Tiffany nodded, knowing that a surprise meant she didn't have to do any work. Okay, she said. But make sure you do it, Aaliyah. Tomorrow is a big day. You want to get all the paperwork done so you can stop worrying. I promise, I said. I will sign everything tomorrow. The power of attorney. The insurance. Everything, good Tiffany said. She patted my cheek. It was condescending and patronizing. You are finally starting to make sense, Aaliyah. Dad would be proud of you looking out for the family. She turned and walked out of the room. Good night, Aaliyah, she called out. Don't stay up too late. I waited until her footsteps faded. I turned back to the computer. The cloning bar was at 100%. Green light. I pulled the drive out. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from adrenaline. I had the evidence. I had the forgery. I had the money trail. And I had Tiffany's blessing to sign my own death warrant, or so she thought. I closed the laptop. I looked around the office one last time. Enjoy your villa in Italy, Julian, I whispered into the darkness, because the only bars you are going to be seeing are the ones on a federal prison cell. I walked out of the study clutching the USB drive like a weapon. The hunt was over. It was time for the kill. The next morning, the sky over Atlanta was a bruised purple color as I drove toward Northside Hospital. I had told Julian I was going to visit my aunt, who was recovering from hip surgery. It was a lie. My aunt lived in Chicago, and she was perfectly healthy. I was going to the hospital to see the only man in the world I could trust. My father. I parked my car in the visitor lot and pulled my oversized sunglasses down over my eyes. I wrapped a scarf around my head. I looked like every other woman in Buckhead trying to avoid being recognized without makeup, but in reality, I was trying to become invisible. I walked through the sliding glass doors and the smell of antiseptic and floor wax filled my nose. It was the smell of sickness, the smell of fear. I took the elevator to the 4th floor, the restricted wing where high-profile patients were kept away from the prying eyes of the press. The FBI had arranged everything. My father was listed under a pseudonym. To the world, Raymond Jenkins was buried 6 feet under. To the nurses on this floor, he was Mr. Washington, a retired veteran recovering from a stroke. I walked down the quiet corridor, my heart beating a steady rhythm against my ribs. I needed to see him. I needed to see the life in his eyes to remind me why I was doing this. I needed to draw strength from him before the final battle tomorrow. But as I turned the corner toward his room, I froze. Standing at the nurse's station, chatting with a young receptionist was a man I recognized, a man who had been to my house for dinner, a man who played golf with my husband, Dr. Marcus Thorne. He wasn't my father's doctor. He was Julian's personal physician, a psychiatrist who catered to the wealthy elite of Atlanta, the kind of doctor who wrote prescriptions for whatever his rich clients wanted and asked no questions. I tried to turn back. I tried to duck into an empty room, but it was too late. He turned around and saw me. "Aaliyah," He called out, his voice echoing in the silent hallway. "Aaliyah Jenkins." I stopped. My blood ran cold. If he told Julian he saw me here on the 4th floor instead of the orthopedic wing where my imaginary aunt was supposed to be, my cover would be blown. I had to improvise. "Dr. Thorne," I said, forcing a weak, trembling smile onto my face. I clutched my purse tight to my chest. "I didn't expect to see you here." He walked over to me, looking concerned. He was wearing an expensive Italian suit under his white coat. He smelled of expensive cologne and arrogance. "I'm just consulting on a case," he said, smoothing his tie. "But what are you doing here, Aaliyah? Julian told me you were at home resting. He said you were barely able to get out of bed." I looked down at the floor, channeling the role of the grieving widow. I needed to get out. I lied, my voice barely a whisper. "The house, it is so quiet. I just wanted to walk. I ended up here. I don't even know where I am." It was a risky lie. It played into the narrative that I was losing my mind, but it was the only card I had to play. Dr. Thorne's eyes lit up. It wasn't sympathy I saw there, it was validation. He nodded slowly as if I had just confirmed a diagnosis. "I see," he said, keeping his voice low and professional. "Disorientation, wandering. Julian mentioned you might be experiencing some of these symptoms." My head snapped up. Julian mentioned what Dr. Thorne sighed and placed a hand on my shoulder. It felt heavy and condescending. "Listen, Aaliyah, I know this is a difficult time. Losing a parent is traumatic, but Julian is very worried about you. He called me yesterday. We had a very long conversation about your condition." "My condition?" I asked, keeping my voice steady even though I wanted to scream. "I didn't know I had a condition." Dr. Thorne gave me a pitying look. The kind of look you give to a child who doesn't understand they are in trouble. He described your behavior over the last few days, he said. The erratic mood swings, the paranoia. He said you were hallucinating smells that weren't there. He said you were talking to people who didn't exist. He is worried you are having a psychotic break triggered by acute grief. I felt the room spin. Hallucinating smells. He meant the perfume. Talking to people who didn't exist. He meant the phone call from my dad. Julian was twisting everything. He was gaslighting me not just to my face, but to a medical professional. But Dr. Thorne wasn't finished, and what he said next made the ground disappear beneath my feet. He asked me to prepare the paperwork, Aaliyah. Paperwork, I choked out. "For the facility," Thorne said casually as if we were discussing a dinner reservation. "There is a private mental health retreat in Vermont. Very secluded, very secure. Julian wants to make sure you get the best care. He asked me to sign the involuntary commitment order. He thinks you are a danger to yourself." Involuntary commitment. The words hung in the air like a guillotine blade. If I didn't sign the papers tomorrow voluntarily, if I fought him, if I refused to hand over the company, this was his plan B. He wasn't just going to divorce me. He wasn't just going to steal my money. He was going to lock me away. He was going to use his doctor friend to declare me insane. He would become my legal guardian. He would have total control over my finances, my body, my life. I would be trapped in a padded room in Vermont, screaming the truth while he lived in my house and spent my millions with his mistress. It was evil. It was pure, calculated evil. And the man standing in front of me, this doctor who had taken an oath to do no harm, was going to help him do it. So Thorne continued oblivious to the horror on my face. "If you are wandering around hospitals confused, Aaliyah, maybe Julian is right. Maybe we should expedite the process. I can have an ambulance take you directly from here. It might be safer." Panic flared in my chest, hot and bright. He wanted to take me now. He wanted to lock me up before I could even get to the meeting tomorrow. I had to get away. I had to get away right now. "No," I said, stepping back. "No, I am fine. I am not confused. I took a wrong turn. That is all." Thorne narrowed his eyes. He reached for his phone. "I should call Julian. He will want to know you are here." "No," I shouted. The receptionist looked up. Thorne looked surprised. I lowered my voice. "Please, don't call him. I want to tell him myself. I want to go home and get my things. If I need to go to Vermont, I want to pack my own bag. Please, Dr. Thorne, give me one more night." I looked at him with pleading eyes. I begged him not as a woman, but as a victim asking for one last shred of dignity. Thorne hesitated. He looked at his watch. He looked at me. "Fine," he said, sliding his phone back into his pocket. "Go home, Aaliyah. Pack your bag. I will see you and Julian tomorrow morning. We can handle the signatures then, but go straight home." "Thank you," I whispered. I turned and walked away. I forced myself not to run. I felt his eyes boring into my back until the elevator doors closed. As soon as the metal doors shut, I collapsed against the wall. I was shaking so hard my teeth chattered. I wasn't just fighting a thief. I was fighting a monster who was willing to erase my entire existence. I didn't go to see my father. I couldn't. I was too rattled. I couldn't let him see me like this. I went straight to the parking garage. I got into my car and locked the doors. I sat there in the dark concrete box, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The fear began to recede, and in its place, something else flooded in. It was cold. It was dark. It was sharp. It was hate. Pure, unadulterated hate. I stopped crying. I wiped my face. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't the scared wife anymore. She was the executioner. Julian wanted to play the insanity card fine. I would show him insanity. I would show him exactly what a crazy woman was capable of. I pulled out my phone. My hands were steady now. I dialed a number I had memorized. It rang once. Yes. Henderson's voice was gruff and immediate. "It is me," I said. My voice sounded different, deeper, stronger. "Aaliyah, is everything okay? Did you get the files I got?" Everything I said, staring at the concrete wall. "But plans have changed, Henderson. We aren't just going for fraud anymore." "What happened?" he asked, sensing the shift in my tone. "He tried to have me committed," I said. I ran into Thorne. "Julian is planning to lock me in an asylum if I don't sign tomorrow. He wants to take my life, Henderson. Not just my money, my life." There was a silence on the other end of the line. Then I heard the sound of a pen hitting a desk. "That son of a B-word," Henderson growled. "Activate Operation Phoenix," I said. Aaliyah Henderson warned. "Phoenix is the nuclear option. If we do this, there is no going back. We will destroy his reputation, his career, his freedom. We will burn him to the ground publicly. It will be a spectacle." "I know," I said. "That is exactly what I want. I don't want him to just go to jail quietly. I want him to lose everything. I want the world to see him for what he is. I want him to stand in that boardroom tomorrow and watch his life disintegrate while I laugh in his face." "Are you sure you are ready for this?" Henderson asked. "It is going to be brutal." I thought about Dr. Thorne's pitying look. I thought about Tiffany stealing my clothes. I thought about Julian kissing Becky on my couch. I am not just ready. "Henderson," I said, starting the engine, "I am looking forward to it." I hung up the phone. I put the car in reverse. Tomorrow was Friday, the day of the will reading, the day Julian thought he would become a king. He had no idea. He was walking into a slaughter, and I was the one holding the knife. I drove out of the parking garage and into the sunlight. The tears were gone. The grief was gone. There was only the mission. Tomorrow is Judgment Day, Julian, and I am the judge, the jury, and the executioner. The bass from the music downstairs was vibrating through the floorboards of the master bedroom. It was 11 o'clock at night on a Thursday. My father had been in the ground for less than a week. The flowers on his grave hadn't even wilted yet, but my husband was throwing a party. I sat at my vanity table staring at myself in the mirror. For the last 4 days, I had worn nothing but oversized gray sweats and a robe. I had worn my grief like a heavy blanket hiding my body and my rage underneath it. Julian expected that woman to stay in this room tonight. He expected me to be cowering under the covers, crying into a pillow, while he celebrated his premature victory with his sycophants and his mistress downstairs. But that woman didn't exist anymore. She died the moment Dr. Thorne tried to lock her away. I reached for my makeup bag. I didn't reach for the soft neutrals I usually wore. I grabbed the dark crimson lipstick. I lined my eyes with sharp black kohl. I contoured my cheekbones until they looked like they could cut glass. Then I stood up and walked to the back of my closet. I pushed past the modest church dresses and the professional suits. I pulled out a garment bag that had been gathering dust for 2 years. Inside was a dress I had bought for a gala that Julian told me was too much. It was a black silk gown that hugged every curve of my body. It had a slit that went up to my thigh and a neckline that plunged deep. It was a dress that said, "I am not mourning." It was a dress that said, "I am hunting." I zipped it up. The silk felt cool against my skin. I slipped on my highest heels. I put on the diamond drop earrings my father had given me for my 30th birthday. I looked at myself one last time. I didn't look like a victim. I looked like the CEO of a company that was about to execute a hostile takeover. I picked up my phone. I opened a secure app. Earlier that evening, I had sent an email to the top 12 shareholders of Jenkins Logistics. These were men and women who had built the company alongside my father. They were conservative, they were family-oriented, and they were powerful. The email invited them to a private virtual memorial service tonight, where I promised to share a few words about the future of the company. They were all logged in waiting for a somber speech. I walked over to the door. I checked the connection. The stream was live, but the camera wasn't facing me yet. I walked out into the hallway. The noise grew louder. I could hear laughter. I could hear glasses clinking. I could hear the thumping beat of a rap song that my father would have hated. I descended the grand staircase. The scene below me was a desecration. There were at least 50 people in my living room. People I didn't know. People who looked like they belonged in a club, not a wake. There were bottles of my father's rare scotch open on the tables. Someone had spilled red wine on the white rug. And in the center of it all, holding court like a king, was Julian. He was standing on the coffee table, his tie around his head like a bandana, a bottle of champagne in one hand. Becky was clinging to his leg, looking up at him with adoring, glassy eyes. Tiffany was dancing with some guy near the fireplace. The music was so loud, no one noticed me at first. I stood on the bottom step and just watched. I let the anger fuel me. I let it sharpen my focus. Then I reached over to the wall panel and killed the music. The silence that followed was instant and jarring. Heads turned. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Julian spun around on the table, almost losing his balance. He looked ready to scream at whoever had cut his vibe, but then he saw me. His jaw actually dropped. Becky looked at me and her eyes widened in jealousy. Tiffany stopped dancing and stared. I didn't say a word. I just walked into the center of the room. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. The click of my heels on the hardwood was the only sound in the room. I walked straight up to Julian. He climbed down from the table. He looked confused. He looked a little scared. He was waiting for me to yell. He was waiting for me to kick everyone out. Instead, I smiled. It was the warmest, most loving smile I had given him in years. I reached out and took the champagne bottle from his hand. "I am sorry to interrupt the party," I said, my voice smooth and projecting to the back of the room. I just couldn't sleep. And then I heard the music, and I realized something. I paused. Julian was staring at me, mesmerized by the dress, by the change in my demeanor. I realized that Julian is right. I continued, turning to face the crowd. My father wouldn't want us to be sad. He would want us to celebrate. He would want us to look to the future. I turned back to Julian and placed a hand on his chest. I could feel his heart hammering through his shirt. "You have been so strong for me, Julian," I purred. "You have taken on so much. Dealing with the board, dealing with the finances, dealing with my illness." I saw him relax. His shoulders dropped. The arrogance flooded back into his face. He thought the drugs were working. He thought I was manic. He thought I had finally broken and accepted his narrative. "I just wanted to come down here and tell you in front of all our friends that I appreciate you," I said. "And I want everyone to know that tomorrow morning I am signing everything over to you. The company, the accounts, the house, everything." A murmur went through the crowd. Julian's eyes lit up like he had just won the lottery. "Are you serious, baby?" he asked, his voice thick with alcohol. "Dead serious," I said. "I am not cut out for business, Julian. You are. You are the visionary. You are the one who should lead the legacy. I just want to be your wife. I just want to rest." Julian let out a whoop of joy. He grabbed me and kissed me. It took every ounce of my training not to bite his lip off. I melted into him, playing the part of the submissive trophy wife perfectly. "I am going to make you so proud, Aaliyah," he shouted to the room. "I am going to take this company to the moon." Everyone cheered. Becky looked furious, but she clapped along. "Now," I said, pulling away gently, "I am going to go get myself a drink. You boys continue. Celebrate. You deserve it." I walked over to the bar area, which was situated in an alcove near the kitchen. This was the strategic point. On the bar counter, there was a large, elaborate floral arrangement. I slipped my phone out of my pocket. I checked the screen. The shareholders were still watching. The screen was black, but the audio was crystal clear. I propped the phone up inside the flowers. The camera lens had a perfect view of the living room, specifically the area where Julian and his inner circle were standing. I tapped the button to enable the video feed. Then I poured myself a glass of water and stepped back into the shadows of the kitchen hallway. I watched. Julian was high on victory. He was invincible. He thought I had gone back upstairs. He turned to Dr. Thorne, who was standing near the window holding a tumbler of whiskey. "Did you hear that Marcus Julian shouted, slapping the doctor on the back? She is handing it over. No fight, no lawyers. She is just giving it to me." Thorne laughed. "I told you she was weak, Julian. The threat of the asylum scared her straight." Julian took a massive swig of champagne. He wiped his mouth with his sleeve. "Man, I can't believe it," he said, his voice slurring, but loud enough for the microphone to pick up perfectly. "I thought the old man had her trained better than that, but she is just like every other woman, emotional." "Stupid." Becky walked over and draped her arms around his neck. "So does this mean we can book the flights to Milan?" she asked, pouting. "Baby, we can buy Milan?" Julian bragged. "Once I sell off the logistics division next week, we are going to be sitting on $50 million cash. $50 million, Dr. Thorne whistled. "And what about Aaliyah? What are you going to do with her?" Julian laughed. It was a cruel, ugly sound. "Aaliyah," he sneered. "As soon as that ink is dry, she is done. I am going to put her in that nut house in Vermont for a few months just to keep her quiet while the divorce goes through. Then I am kicking her out." He looked around the room, making sure everyone was listening. "I am tired of pretending," he shouted. "I am tired of waking up next to that boring old black woman. She is dead weight. She is aging like milk. I need fresh energy. I need someone who looks good on my arm in Europe." He pulled Becky close and kissed her neck. "This is the upgrade right here, boys," he announced. "Out with the old, in with the new. Aaliyah was just the ticket to the money. And now the ride is over." Tiffany, who was standing nearby, clinked her glass against his. "Cheers to that, big brother," she said. "I am already looking at condos in Miami. I can't wait to never have to listen to her lecture me about savings accounts again. She is such a drag." Julian raised his bottle high. To the end of the Jenkins era, he toasted. And to the beginning of the Julian reign. That old man is probably rolling in his grave right now, knowing I am about to dismantle his precious empire and spend every dime on models and bottles. He threw his head back and laughed. The room laughed with him. I stood in the shadows, my hand gripping the doorframe. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't sad. I was checking the comments section on the live stream. It was exploding. I saw the names popping up. Mr. Sterling, the chairman of the board. Is this happening right now? Mrs. Gable, the largest minority shareholder. Did he just say he is selling the company? Mr. Henderson, my lawyer, we have it all recorded, every word. Mr. Davis, a retired judge and my father's best friend, I am calling the district attorney. They heard everything. They heard the fraud. They heard the plan to sell the company without board approval. They heard the conspiracy to commit me to an institution. And they heard the vile racism and disrespect toward my father and me. Julian thought he was talking to a room full of friends. He didn't know he was confessing to a jury of the most powerful people in Atlanta. I waited for the comments to peak. I waited until I saw the text message from Henderson. "We have enough. The police are on their way. Stop the feed." I walked back to the flower arrangement. I picked up the phone. I turned the camera around to face me. I looked directly into the lens. My eyes were dry. My face was stone. "Thank you for watching, gentlemen," I said softly. "I will see you all at the board meeting tomorrow. It seems we have a vacancy to fill." I ended the stream. I looked at Julian one last time. He was dancing on the table again, pouring champagne on the floor. He looked so happy. He looked so free. "Enjoy it," I whispered. "Enjoy the last night of your life." I turned around and walked back up the stairs. I didn't take off the dress. I didn't wash off the makeup. I sat in the chair by the window and watched the driveway. I waited for the blue lights. They arrived 20 minutes later, but they weren't sirens. They were silent. 2 black SUVs pulled up to the gate. It wasn't the police yet. It was private security sent by the board. They were securing the perimeter to make sure he didn't run before the morning. I went to bed. The bass was still thumping downstairs, but now it sounded different. It sounded like the heartbeat of a dying animal. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in 5 days, I slept. I slept the deep, peaceful sleep of a woman who knows that when she wakes up, the world will be right again. Friday morning arrived with a sky so blue it felt like an insult to the darkness that was about to unfold. I stood in the elevator of the Jenkins Logistics Tower, watching the numbers climb. Floor 30, floor 40, floor 50. My stomach should have been in knots. My hands should have been shaking, but I felt nothing but a cold, terrifying calm. I was dressed in white today, a sharp, tailored white suit that stood out against the sea of gray and black that usually filled these hallways. I wasn't here to mourn anymore. I was here to cleanse. The elevator door slid open with a soft chime. The reception area was quiet. Too quiet. I walked past the massive logo of the company my father had built from scratch. I walked down the long corridor lined with portraits of past executives. My father's portrait was at the end, draped in a black ribbon. I touched the frame as I passed, just a light brush of my fingertips. It was a silent promise. I pushed open the heavy double doors of the main boardroom. The room was already full. The air conditioning was humming low and steady, but the atmosphere was thick with tension. The 12 board members were seated around the massive oval mahogany table. These were men and women I had known since I was a child. Mr. Sterling, the chairman, sat at the head of the table. Usually he would greet me with a warm hug. Today, he just nodded. His face was grim. His eyes were hard. He knew. They all knew. They had all watched the live stream last night. They had heard my husband call them old and irrelevant. They had heard him plan to sell their life's work. But they were professionals. They sat in silence, waiting for the show to begin. I took my seat at the far end of the table opposite the empty chairman's chair. Beside me sat Mr. Henderson, my father's lawyer and my greatest ally. He patted my hand. His grip was firm. He placed a thick leather folder on the table in front of him. Then the doors banged open. Julian entered the room. He didn't just walk in, he made an entrance. He was wearing a brand new bespoke suit that I knew cost more than my first car. His hair was perfectly styled. He smelled of expensive cologne and triumph. He walked with a swagger that made my skin crawl. He looked like a man who owned the world. And trailing behind him like eager puppies were his accomplices. Tiffany walked in wearing a dress that was far too short for a corporate environment, carrying a designer bag that I knew she had stolen from my closet this morning. She smirked at me as she took a seat near the window, pulling out her phone immediately. And then there was Becky. She was dressed in a tight pencil skirt and a blouse that was unbuttoned one button too low. She was carrying a notepad and a pen, holding them awkwardly, as if she had never held office supplies before. Julian had listed her as his executive secretary for the meeting to get her security clearance. The audacity was breathtaking. He had brought his mistress to his wife's inheritance meeting. Julian marched to the head of the table. He stood behind my father's empty chair. He placed his hands on the leather backrest, claiming it. He looked around the room, his smile wide and predatory. "Good morning, everyone," he boomed, his voice echoing off the glass walls. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice. I know this is a difficult time for the family, but business waits for no one, right?" He looked at the board members, expecting nods of agreement. He got nothing. just 12 pairs of cold, unblinking eyes staring back at him. Julian faltered for a second. His smile flickered, but his ego was too big to let him see the danger. He cleared his throat and turned his gaze to me. "Aaliyah," he said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. "You look rested. I am glad you decided to join us. I know how fragile you have been feeling." He was setting the stage. He was reminding everyone that I was the grieving, unstable widow. I smiled back at him. It was a sharp, razor-thin smile. I wouldn't miss it for the world. "Julian," I said, my voice steady and clear. Julian nodded dismissively. "Right. Well, let's get this over with. I have a lot of work to do today. I have meetings scheduled with the buyers. With the partners in New York." He pulled a thick stack of documents from his briefcase and slid them down the long table toward me. They spun across the polished wood and stopped right in front of my hands. "These are the transfer documents, Aaliyah," he said. "Just like we discussed last night. Full transfer of executive power and voting rights to me, effective immediately. It also grants me power of attorney over the estate assets to handle the liquidation of debts." He looked at the board members. "My wife has decided to step back from the company," he announced. "She wants to focus on her health. She knows she isn't capable of running an empire of this magnitude. So I will be taking the helm." Tiffany let out a small, audible giggle from the corner. Becky was trying to look professional, but she was chewing on the end of her pen. "Sign it, Aaliyah," Julian said, snapping his fingers at me. "Let's go." I looked at the papers. I looked at the pen he had tossed toward me. I picked up the pen. Julian's eyes lit up. He leaned forward, hungry for the ink that would make him a king. But I didn't sign. I held the pen in the air, twirling it between my fingers. "Actually, Julian," I said softly, "before I sign, I think we need to hear the will. Isn't that standard procedure, Mr. Henderson?" Julian rolled his eyes. He let out a loud, exasperated sigh. "Seriously, Aaliyah. We know what the will says. Your dad left everything to you. And you are signing it to me? Why do we need the theatrics?" Mr. Henderson stood up slowly. He was an old man, but in that moment he looked like a mountain. He didn't look at Julian. He looked at the smart screen on the wall. Mr. Jenkins left very specific instructions for this meeting. Henderson said, his voice gravelly and deep. He updated his will 3 days before his death. Julian froze. "Updated?" he asked. "What do you mean updated?" "He was in the hospital. He was dying. He couldn't update anything." Henderson ignored him. He pressed a button on the remote control. The lights in the boardroom dimmed automatically. The massive screen at the end of the room flickered to life. "I am afraid there is no paper will to read today," Mr. Julian Henderson said. Mr. Jenkins preferred to deliver his final message in person. On the screen, static buzzed for a second. And then a face appeared. It was my father. He was sitting in his favorite leather armchair in his study. He was wearing his favorite navy blue suit. He looked healthy. He looked strong. And he looked furious. Julian's face went pale. He gripped the back of the chair so hard his knuckles turned white. "What is this?" he whispered. "When was this recorded?" "Shh," I said, bringing a finger to my lips. "Watch." On the screen, my father leaned forward. His eyes seemed to lock directly onto Julian's. "Hello, son-in-law," my father's voice boomed through the surround sound speakers. Julian flinched. It was as if a ghost had just punched him in the chest. "If you are watching this video," my father continued, his voice dripping with disdain, "it means 2 things have happened. 1, I am dead. And 2, you are currently standing at the head of my table, probably wearing a suit you bought with money you stole from me, trying to bully my daughter into signing away her birthright." Tiffany gasped. She dropped her phone. It clattered loudly on the floor. Becky stopped chewing her pen and looked around the room in panic. Julian looked like he was going to vomit. This is fake," he stammered, looking at the board members. "This is a deep fake." "Aaliyah made this up." "Sit down, Julian." Mr. Sterling shouted from the other end of the table. Julian sat. He collapsed into the chair. My father's chair. On the screen, my father smiled. But it wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a shark that had just smelled blood. "I know you are sitting in my chair, Julian," the video continued. "You always coveted that chair. You used to stare at it when you thought I wasn't looking. You thought it made you look powerful. You thought it made you a king." My father chuckled darkly. "But here's the thing about that chair, Julian. I had it custom made. And because I never trusted you, not from the day you walked into my house, I had a little modification installed last week." Julian looked down at the seat of the chair. He looked terrified. He tried to stand up, but his legs wouldn't work. "There is a pressure sensor in the seat cushion," my father said. "It is connected to the building's security system, and it is connected to a remote server at the FBI Cybercrime Division." Julian's eyes bulged. "The moment you sat your ungrateful behind in that chair, my father said you activated the upload. Every file you tried to delete, every email you tried to hide, every transaction you made to the Cayman Islands. It has all been sent to the authorities." My father leaned back in the video, crossing his arms. "And one more thing, that chair also locks." There was a loud mechanical click from the chair Julian was sitting in. Metal clamps shot out from the armrests and locked around Julian's wrists. He screamed. He tried to yank his hands away, but he was trapped. He was literally handcuffed to the throne he had tried to steal. "What the hell?" Julian screamed, pulling at the restraints. "Let me go. Aaliyah, let me go." On the screen, my father stood up. "You wanted the seat of power, Julian. You got it. Now sit there and wait for the police. They should be arriving in about 3 minutes. The screen went black. The lights in the room came back up full brightness. The silence was deafening. Julian was panting, sweating, pulling at the metal cuffs. He looked at me. His eyes were wide with terror and confusion. "Aaliyah," he pleaded, "baby, this is a mistake. Your dad was crazy. The dementia. He didn't know what he was doing. Help me. Where is the key?" I stood up slowly. I smoothed my white suit. I walked down the length of the table. My heels clicked on the floor. Click, click, click. I stopped right next to him. I looked down at the man who had promised to love and cherish me, the man who had tried to poison me, the man who had called me old and useless. I leaned in close so only he could hear me. "There is no key, Julian," I whispered, "just like there is no Italy. Just like there is no future for you." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the USB drive, the one I had used to clone his phone, the one I had used to record his confession. I placed it gently on the table in front of him. "Oh, and by the way," I said, my voice cool and pleasant, "you were right about one thing last night. The Jenkins era is over." I turned to the board members. "Gentlemen," I said, "I think we are ready for the new CEO." I turned back to Julian, who was now sobbing, pulling uselessly at the chair. "It is the Aaliyah era now." And then the doors opened again, but this time it wasn't a family member. It was the Atlanta Police Department. The double doors at the far end of the boardroom swung open with a force that made the heavy wood shudder against the walls. The air in the room shifted instantly. It went from the stale tension of a corporate hostile takeover to the electric, terrifying atmosphere of a resurrection. I watched Julian's face. He was still struggling against the metal cuffs that bound him to the chairman's seat. His eyes were fixed on the doorway, and for a moment he stopped breathing. His skin, which was usually flushed with arrogance, drained of all color until he looked like a wax figure. 2 uniformed police officers stepped in first, clearing the path. Then came 2 men in dark suits with earpieces, the distinct uniform of the FBI. And then finally came the moment that would haunt my husband for the rest of his miserable life. A nurse in blue scrubs pushed a wheelchair into the room. Sitting in that chair was not a ghost. It was not a hologram. It was a man of flesh and blood. He looked thinner than before. His skin was pale from days spent in a medically induced coma, and his hands resting on his knees trembled slightly. But his eyes were clear. His jaw was set in granite. My father, Raymond Jenkins, rolled into the room he had built. The reaction was immediate and chaotic. Tiffany let out a scream that sounded like tearing metal. It was a high-pitched shriek of pure primal terror. She scrambled backward in her chair, her heels slipping on the polished floor. "He is dead!" she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at him. "He is dead! We buried him! It is a ghost! Julian, it is a ghost!" She covered her eyes, curling into a ball as if hiding from a vengeful spirit. Becky the opportunist didn't scream. She did the math. She looked at the handcuffs on Julian. She looked at the man in the wheelchair. She looked at the police. She realized the gravy train had just crashed off the tracks and burst into flames. She grabbed her purse and bolted toward the side exit door, trying to slip away in the confusion. She made it 3 steps before a massive police officer stepped in her path, blocking the door like a brick wall. "Sit down, ma'am," he boomed, his voice shaking the glass walls. Becky froze. She looked back at Julian, then at the police. She slowly backed away and sank into the nearest chair, bursting into fake hysterical tears. But Julian had the worst reaction of all. He didn't scream. He didn't run. He simply broke. The reality of what was happening was too big for his brain to process. He had seen the body. He had seen the coffin lowered into the ground. He had spent the last 5 days celebrating his crime. No, he wheezed, his voice barely audible. No, impossible. I checked the pulse. The room went silent at that confession. He had just admitted he checked the pulse, not to save a life, but to ensure death. My father signaled the nurse to stop the wheelchair right next to me. He reached out and took my hand. His grip was weak, but his warmth was real. I squeezed his hand back, drawing strength from him. "Hello, Julian," my father said. His voice was raspy, but it carried the weight of Judgment Day. Julian's head lolled back against the headrest. He looked like he was having a stroke. You are supposed to be dead," Julian whispered, tears of fear streaming down his face. "The pills, the heart attack." My father smiled grimly. "I am hard to kill, son," he said, "especially when I know the devil is sleeping in my guest room." The chief of police stepped forward. He was a tall, imposing man who had known my father for 20 years. "Julian Monroe," he announced, his voice formal and cold. "You are under arrest." But before he could read the rights, I stepped forward. "Wait, Chief," I said, raising my hand. "Not yet. The board needs to see why. They need to see the full extent of the rot that has been festering in this company." I turned to the board members. They were all standing now, looking from my father to Julian in total shock. Mr. Sterling looked like he was about to faint. "Please sit down, gentlemen," I said, my voice commanding the room. "I have prepared a short presentation. I think you will find the quarterly figures very interesting." I picked up the remote control. I pointed it at the screen where my father's video had just played. Slide 1. The screen flashed. A complex web of bank transfers appeared. It was a flow chart I had spent the last 3 nights building. It showed money leaving Jenkins' logistics accounts, entering shell companies with vague names like JM Consulting, and then washing up in offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. As you can see here, I explained using a laser pointer to trace the red lines. Over the last 18 months, Julian has embezzled approximately $4.2 million from the operational budget. He disguised these withdrawals as vendor payments for fuel and maintenance, but these vendors don't exist. I clicked the remote. The screen zoomed in on the destination account. "The beneficiary of this account is not a vendor," I said. "It is a holding company registered to one Julian Monroe, and the secondary signatory is Rebecca Daniels." I pointed the laser at Becky. She gasped and covered her face with her hands. "He told me it was legal," she sobbed. "He told me it was his bonus money." "He lied," I said coldly. "It was my father's money. It was the pension fund for our drivers. He stole from the men and women who keep this country moving to fund his gambling addiction." I clicked the remote again. Slide 2. This was the hard one. The room went deadly quiet. It was a grainy, black and white video. It was taken from a hidden camera inside my father's home office 2 weeks ago. The video showed Julian standing at my father's desk. He looked around nervously. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small orange pill bottle. He opened my father's medical bag. He took out the heart medication bottle. He dumped the real pills into his pocket and replaced them with the pills from the orange bottle. The board members gasped in unison. Mr. Henderson looked away, unable to watch. "This," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage, "is the moment my husband became a murderer. He swapped digoxin, which regulates heart rhythm, for a high-dose stimulant." He knew my father's heart was weak. He knew this would cause a massive cardiac event. He didn't just want the money. He wanted my father erased. Julian was shaking his head violently in the chair. No, that is out of context, he screamed, desperate and delusional. I was organizing his meds. I was helping him. The video ended. I looked at Julian with pure disgust. You were helping him into a grave, I said. I clicked the remote again. Slide 3. This wasn't a visual, it was audio. The waveform appeared on the screen. I need you to listen closely to this, I told the board. This was recorded 3 days ago in my kitchen while I was at the funeral home arranging the burial of the man Julian thought he had killed. I pressed play. Julian's voice filled the room loud and clear. She is losing it, Tiff. She is totally unstable. Then Tiffany's voice. So just commit her, Julian. Dr. Thorne will sign the papers. Just say she is a danger to herself. Lock her up in that place in Vermont. Once she is declared incompetent, you get power of attorney over everything. We can sell the house and be gone before she even gets out of the straitjacket. Then Julian laughing. Yeah. A few months in the loony bin will shut her up. She is just a stepping stone anyway. I am done with her. The recording ended. I looked at Tiffany. She was no longer screaming. She was staring at the floor, her face a mask of shame and terror. She knew there was no talking her way out of this. I looked at the board members. They looked sick. They looked at Julian not as a colleague, but as a monster. He was going to lock me away. I said, my voice quiet but cutting through the silence. He was going to take my freedom, my sanity, and my life, just so he could buy a villa in Italy. He didn't just betray his vows. He conspired to enslave me. I clicked the remote one last time. Slide 4. A document appeared on the screen. It was the mortgage deed for 1200 Highland Drive. My home. The sanctuary my father had bought for me. And finally, I said, this is the loan agreement Julian signed last week. He forged my signature. You can see here where he practiced it on the side of the page. He leveraged my home, my personal property, to pay off a loan shark named Vinny. He sold the roof over my head while I was sleeping under it. I turned off the screen. The room was plunged back into the stark reality of the morning light. I walked over to Julian. I stood right in front of him. I was close enough to smell the sweat of his fear. You wanted everything, Julian, I said. You wanted the money. You wanted the power. You wanted the mistress. You wanted the freedom. I leaned down, my face inches from his. You bet against the wrong family. You thought because we were kind, we were weak. You thought because I was a woman, I was stupid. You forgot who raised me. You forgot that I am Raymond Jenkins's daughter. I stood up and looked at the chief of police. He is all yours, chief, I said. The chief nodded. He signaled to his officers. Get him out of that chair, the chief barked. The officers moved in. They unlocked the magnetic cuffs on the chair and immediately slapped real steel handcuffs onto Julian's wrists. They hauled him up. His legs gave way and they had to drag him. Julian started screaming. It was a raw animal sound. Aaliyah, please, I am sorry. I will fix it. I will pay it back. Don't let them take me. I am your husband. I love you. I watched him being dragged toward the door. I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel love. I felt lighter. 2 other officers moved toward Tiffany. She didn't fight. She just wept, putting her hands out to be cuffed. And Becky. Becky tried to bargain. I will testify, she shouted as the officer grabbed her arm. I will tell you everything. He made me do it. They were paraded out of the boardroom one by one. The trash was being taken out. When the doors finally closed behind them, the silence returned. But it wasn't heavy anymore. It was clean. I turned to my father. He was looking at me with tears in his eyes. He reached out, and I took his hand again. You did good, baby girl, he whispered. You did good. I looked at the board members. They were all standing. Mr. Sterling wiped his eyes and began to clap. Slowly at first, then louder. The others joined in. It wasn't polite applause. It was a salute. I took a deep breath. I adjusted my white jacket. I looked at the empty chair at the head of the table. I walked over to it. I didn't sit down. Not yet. I looked at Mr. Henderson. What is next on the agenda, I asked. Henderson smiled, closing the folder. I believe he said we have a company to run, Madam CEO. I smiled. The nightmare was over. The sun was shining through the glass walls of the 50th floor, and for the first time in a long time, I could see the horizon clearly. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut is a sound I will never forget. It was distinct and metallic, and it signaled the end of my nightmare. Julian was on his knees. The man who had walked into the room like a king was now crumbling like a castle made of sand. The officers hauled him up, but his legs were useless. He was weeping. Not the dignified, silent weeping of a man who regrets his actions, but the ugly, loud sobbing of a coward who got caught. "You are charging me with attempted murder," the chief of police stated, his voice cutting through Julian's wails. Along with grand larceny, embezzlement, and fraud, Julian twisted his body trying to look at the board members, trying to find one sympathetic face. He found none. Desperation took over. He looked at Becky, who was currently being handcuffed by another officer near the door. His eyes filled with hate. It was her, Julian screamed, pointing his chin at his mistress since his hands were bound. It was Becky. She made me do it. She told me to change the pills. She said we needed the money for Italy. I didn't want to do it. She manipulated me. She is the mastermind. The room gasped. Even in his final moments, he was trying to hide behind a woman. Becky's face went red with fury. She struggled against the officer holding her. "You lying piece of garbage," she shrieked. "You told me your wife was a burden. You told me you wanted her dead." The chief of police stepped between them. He looked at Julian with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Actually, Mr. Monroe, the chief said we are very interested in Ms. Daniels. Or should I say Ms. Thorne?" Julian froze. "Thorne." The chief nodded toward the paperwork in his hand. "We ran her prints 10 minutes ago. Rebecca Daniels is an alias. Her real name is Rebecca Thorne. She is the estranged niece of your doctor friend Marcus Thorne, and she is currently on the payroll of Apex Logistics. Your biggest competitor." The silence that followed was absolute. Julian looked at Becky. His mouth fell open. "You are a spy," he whispered. Becky stopped fighting. She stood up straighter, and a cruel smirk played on her lips. "I wasn't just a spy, Julian," she spat. "I was the demolition crew. Apex paid me $100,000 to make sure you ran this company into the ground. They didn't think it would be this easy, though. They didn't know you were stupid enough to try and kill your father-in-law. You did my job for me." Julian let out a sound that wasn't human. It was the sound of a man realizing he had destroyed his life, not for love, not even for lust, but for a corporate takedown. He had sold his soul for a woman who was laughing at him all the way to the bank. "Get them out of here," the chief ordered. As they dragged Julian past me, he looked at me one last time. His eyes were begging. "Aaliyah, please," he sobbed. "I didn't know. I was tricked too. I am a victim here." I didn't say a word. I just watched him disappear into the hallway. But we weren't done yet. Tiffany was still in the corner. She hadn't been handcuffed yet because the officers were focused on the main targets. She saw the chaos. She saw her brother being dragged away. And then her eyes landed on the conference table. My phone, the phone that had the cloning software, the phone that had the evidence of her stealing the Hermes bags, the phone that linked her to the conspiracy. She lunged. It was a desperate animal move. She scrambled across the room, her heels slipping on the floor. Her hands were claws reaching for the device that held her fate. "Give me that," she screamed. She grabbed the phone, but she didn't account for me. I stepped in. I didn't call for security. I didn't yell. I swung. My hand connected with her cheek with a force that vibrated all the way up my arm. It was a slap that held 5 years of insults. 5 years of her eating my food, living in my house, and calling me a dog. 5 years of her disrespecting my father. The sound of the slap cracked through the boardroom like a gunshot. Tiffany spun around and fell to the floor, dropping the phone. She held her face looking up at me in shock. Her lip was bleeding. You hit me," she whimpered. I stood over her. I smoothed my white jacket. I looked down at her with cold indifference. "That wasn't for me," I said, my voice steady. "That was for calling my father a corpse while you were trying to steal his watches." 2 officers picked her up. "Tiffany Monroe," the officer said. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and grand theft. We found 20 luxury handbags in the trunk of your car this morning. We also found the silver cutlery from the Jenkins estate." "Wait," Tiffany cried as they cuffed her. "I was just borrowing them. Aaliyah, tell them. We are family. You can't let them take me. Who is going to take care of my dog?" I leaned in close. Maybe you should have thought about that before you tried to put me in an asylum." "Tiffany," I said, "don't worry about the dog. I will find it a home that doesn't smell like betrayal." They dragged her out, screaming my name. The room was finally clear of the parasites. I walked to the window. I looked out at the Atlanta skyline. The sun was fully up now. The storm was over. Mr. Henderson came up beside me. "Are you okay, Madam CEO?" he asked gently. I took a deep breath. I felt the air fill my lungs. It tasted sweet. "I am better than okay, Henderson," I said. "I am free." The aftermath was swift and brutal. I didn't go back to the mansion that night. I couldn't. The smell of Julian and the memory of his betrayal were seeped into the walls. I stayed at a hotel for a week while my lawyers handled the cleanup. I fired everyone. I fired the maid who had helped Tiffany pack my bags. I fired the security guards who had let Becky in without logging her name. I fired the entire executive team that Julian had appointed. I purged Jenkins Logistics of every single trace of his incompetence. My father officially retired 2 days later. He said he had seen enough excitement for one lifetime. He bought a boat and moved down to the Florida Keys to fish and enjoy the sunset. He visits me once a month, and he looks 10 years younger. As for the house, I sold it. I sold 1200 Highland Drive to a developer who tore it down to build a park. I didn't want the money. I donated the entire proceeds to a charity that helps women escape domestic abuse. I wanted that ground to be purified. I moved to New York City. I bought a penthouse in Tribeca with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlook the Hudson River. It is modern, it is bright, and it is mine. I took over as interim CEO for 6 months, just long enough to stabilize the stock and hire a replacement. I realized I didn't want to run a logistics empire. That was my father's dream. My dream was finding the truth. So I went back to forensic accounting. But this time, I opened my own firm. We specialize in helping spouses uncover hidden assets during high-conflict divorces. I help women find the money their husbands try to steal. And business is booming. And Julian, he didn't get Italy. He got 25 years in a maximum security prison. He tried to appeal. He tried to blame the drugs. He tried to blame Becky. But the video evidence was irrefutable. Last I heard, he works in the prison laundry room for 12 cents an hour. Tiffany got 5 years. She calls me sometimes collect from jail. I never answer. Becky testified against Apex Logistics to cut a deal. She got probation, but her reputation is destroyed. She is currently working as a waitress at a diner in Alabama. 6 months ago, I was working late in my new office. There was a knock on the door. It was the young associate lawyer from Henderson's firm, the one who had helped me install the cameras, the one who had driven the getaway car at the cemetery. His name is David. He is tall, he is kind, and he is brilliant. He walked in holding a coffee and a bagel. "I thought you might be hungry," he said. "You have been staring at that spreadsheet for 4 hours." I looked at him. I saw a man who had seen me at my worst and helped me fight for my best. I saw a man who respected my brain as much as my body. "Thank you, David," I said, smiling. "We are going to dinner tonight. He is taking me to a jazz club in Harlem. I am wearing a red dress. I am not wearing a wedding ring. Not yet. But for the first time in a long time, I am wearing a genuine smile. My name is Aaliyah Jenkins. I survived the plot to kill my father. I survived the plot to steal my fortune. And I survived the man who slept in my bed and wished me dead. If you are listening to this and you feel like something is wrong in your life, if you feel like you are being gaslighted, if you feel like you are being underestimated, listen to that voice, check the accounts, check the phone, and never ever let them see you cry. Because blood might be thicker than water, but ink is thicker than blood. And nothing is more powerful than a woman who has the receipts. This is Aaliyah signing off. Stay safe, stay smart, and stay dangerous.